MediaTech Ventures Community Spotlight brought to you by Insperity, powerful HR solutions with exceptional follow-through. HR that makes a difference. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Community Spotlight. I am with Phoebe Mroczek, which I need to make sure I get right every single time. Yes, thank you so much.
That's so impressive.
I got to admit, I was not excited about having to remember that because I'm really bad with names. But anyway, I'm glad I nailed it. She is the founder and host of the Unbecoming podcast, which is an incredible podcast. We'll get into a little bit more about the podcast later in the show. Welcome to the show, Phoebe. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to be with you today.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to get right into it. Your entrepreneurial journey started at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out, in fact, fifth grade. So fifth grade, what inspired fifth grade Phoebe to sell scrunchies?
Well, I have to say, it actually started before that. I was selling Snapple, pretending it was lemonade, which is a whole nother thing. It's really terrible.
Oh, no.
So that's not something I've ever told out loud to anybody. But so when I was in fifth grade, I realized that none of the kids I was almost too embarrassed to sell. I was making scrunchies for myself, and all my sister's friends loved them and were always commenting on them. And so I thought, well, what if I started to sell them to my sister's friends? And it made it easier because it wasn't so personal, so I could still make them. And then my friends thought I was cool, and I would sell them to my sister's friends. And it was awesome. And so that was my first real second maybe, but real creation that I wasn't lying about. So I just knew that I could do it, and I knew I could sell things that I really
awesome.
liked. So,
yeah, like every other fifth grader, right? That's incredible. You did mention in the Inc. article that I read, dipping your toe in the corporate world in Asia. What brought you there, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, the first thing I learned was because right after college, I moved to New York. I worked at a hedge fund, and I was just like really not enjoying it. There was a little bit of harassment happening. It was just not a very pleasant experience. And so it was the first time that I had really seen myself as worth something. And when all of this was happening, and I was just getting it wasn't a pleasant working environment. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. And so I basically told him where I wanted him to go, which, I shouldn't say out loud. And I bought a one-way ticket to Taiwan. And because I had never known anyone that had ever been there, and I had done some research, so it wasn't like totally on a whim. I had gotten my teaching English certificate, so I knew I could go and get a job. And so I got a job there. But what really brought me to China, which was where I feel like my professional career really started, I had just done some work with a couple organizations, and one of the ones was United Nations. And I just had done so much research on people that I thought were doing something I wanted to do, which I thought at the time was international development. I was looking at getting my master's in international development. I ended up changing to project management, which is what I was doing in Taiwan while teaching. But when I got to the United Nations in Beijing, or I got the job, it was like this, that's not really where I wanted to go. But was I willing to make myself uncomfortable in a place I didn't really want to go to do the thing I wanted to do? And the answer was yes. And so once I got in there, I kept saying at the time, and I always say now, is I just need to get my foot in the door. And once my foot's in the door, I can work the room. But I just got to get that some sort of opportunity. And I felt that was it. And so I started working at the UN, saw that there was so much red tape. I was working on the Millennium Development Goals at the time, and I was writing speeches and press releases, things that I was so underqualified to be doing. But I just, they're like, have you ever written a speech before? I was like, sure. And then I did it, so it was like this, I had to really dig deep, and not so much the embellishing, but I think people don't put their hat in the ring for certain things that maybe they could grow into. And so that was something, I was just really ambitious. And I was like, yeah, of course I've done that. Yeah, I've written press releases, no problem. And then I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? And then you figure it out.
That's right.
So I think that's probably what I learned and most in that. And the things I was working on they kept saying, they're like, well, in 10 years, when this is, when we start to integrate this or implement it. And I'm like, 10 years, I'm not working on something it was just so far in the future that I couldn't
Wow.
grasp it. So I ended up moving to a different company, to a Chinese finance company. And then I moved to CBRE, commercial real estate. And so I was running their retail for Asia Pacific marketing. And that was like my kind of corporate experience.
That's it's pretty remarkable to fifth grade Phoebe, fake Snapple or fake lemonade, and how that confidence kind of really carried throughout, right, to who you are today, and kind of the experience you had, whether that was at the hedge fund and saying, I'm not going to subject myself to this kind of harassment, to one-way ticket, figuring stuff out. It's pretty remarkable how we get those characteristics at such a young age, and they kind of stick with us throughout our journey in life, and we just kind of fine tune them, or sometimes we don't. They take control. So fast forward, I'm glad you talked a little bit about the CBRE. You've held multiple kind of communications and marketing roles throughout your career. What was it that made the light bulb go off for you and say, podcasting?
Oh man. Well, I think I have always been a natural communicator. If you can talk to my family. I've always been somebody who liked to communicate, whether that's through talking. I love to write. I think writing's actually my first love. I've been writing my whole life. And then I was working with a business partner, a former business partner, and he and I were just like, what's a next step that would be quite innovative and a little bit different? And at that point, that was, I think, almost 6 years ago. And I think that's right. And we just decided, we're like, why don't we start a podcast? It's something that not as many people were doing. And it was a huge leap of faith to see if this was something that we could do. And so we started it. It did really well. And then I decided, I was like, this is something I know I want to do on my own. I'm not having the conversations, the like depth or the richness of conversation that I really care about. And that's kind of what led me or propelled me into starting my own show, which was almost 3 years ago now.
That's awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because you touched on it a little bit. So the Unbecoming podcast is designed, from what at least I've listened to and what I've read, ultimately empower people going through or pursuing anything in life. To quote, a nationally syndicated radio show that helps entrepreneurs create what they want by being more of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to take on such a wide range of topics?
Well, I heard a quote that is from Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist. And he said, maybe the journey isn't so much about becoming anything. Maybe it's actually about unbecoming everything that's not really you, so you can be who you were meant to be in the first place. And I heard that literally every time I say it, I get chills. Yeah. And I thought, I have been coaching and working with, I had a marketing agency for a little bit, and working with people to really refine their voice and how to create solid, effective, honest marketing messages. And so what I was finding in a lot of these people who were teaching everybody was that behind the scenes, they're a big mess. And so I understand that and I get it, right? We're not all put together and all of that. But I thought that what was missing was this real transparency. And so I go based on truth, trust, and transparency. That has been something that I like, 3 pillars of my like core, just core statutes of living, right? That those are things that are really important to me. And so what I realized was that it's not just in one area, right? It's like this bleeding over into other areas. So if you don't have it together over here or in certain areas, so if you're not finding, let's say, abundance over here in business, there's something blocked in other areas of your life. And I think that people take on just the business side. And I think this is what made me a really good business coach, was that I don't actually care about your business, which might sound really weird to hire somebody who doesn't care about your business. But it was like, I actually care about your relationships and your kids and your health and fitness, because if we can't see it, it's like you're banging your head against the wall over here. what if we looked over here, and that's going to show us everything we need to know about why that's not working. And I don't think enough people spend the time and dig to the depth that I want. I want to know everything. I'm quite a personal coach in that way. So rather than just looking at business, it was like, well, why don't we look at all areas, but more specific topics? So how do we figure out where all of those integrate and create a more well, actually, I'm not going to say balanced because I don't like that word, but a more harmonized version
Harmonious.
Harmonious. Thank you. Harmonious version of who you are. Right. And so that's kind of what inspired the show. And the whole time has been my own journey of figuring that out as well. So allowing people in on my life to make sure that I'm being, I'm acting in integrity and that I am practicing what I preach, which is really hard sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. As us consultants do more for our clients than we do for ourselves a lot.
Totally.
And those are very true words too, right? I mean, a lot of extremely successful professionals are emotionally unfulfilled, right?
Yes.
They believe things can fill that void of emotional fulfillment when it's not. It's material, and it doesn't. Yep. And so they're at the top of the mountain looking over the beautiful sunset by themselves, to which most people unfortunately then fall into some sort of depression or get really confused because they've spent their entire life getting to this point, and now that they're at the top, they don't know where to go. Interesting.
Well, I think it's one of the areas I think I have thrived in just in my life, but also helping people is the area of transition. Right. And so I'm a former college athlete, and when I quit in college, it was so hard to figure out, well, if I'm not a soccer player, who am I? And that has been something that has been a theme in my life. If I'm not this, then what am I? And so really helping people. And I think that, helping people establish that and really ask themselves those questions, which are not fun, which are not beautiful and, pretty and tied up in a neat bow. It's really messy and uncomfortable. But the idea that, being on the top of the mountain, like you said, like everyone has that. And we hear that all the time, but it's almost like we need to experience it for ourselves. But I also find I want to intercept people before they hit catastrophe. That's always been something that I'm like, you don't need someone to die, an illness, you to lose your job in order to make the shifts that you want. So what is it going to require? And how deep do you need to go, right? How low do you need to go in order for the pain to hurt bad enough to make a shift? And that's where I want to remind people, either through my experiences or other people's experiences, that it doesn't need to be that way. We don't need to torture ourselves to get what we want.
Yeah, that's besides being extremely fit. I'm currently going through that myself. I always say I wish it was as easy to get in shape as it was to get out of shape.
I mean, I hear you.
So speaking about topics, what does your process look like? How do you plan on what you're going to tackle topic wise? Or is it as structured as that? Or is it just around maybe the person that you're interviewing?
Well, so I have to say in the last, almost year, the majority of my shows have been solo shows. So it's just me talking. And the way that I create those is I'm really methodical. I use your notepad app. And when I think of a topic I just put it in my phone and I'm like, that's something, because it's the more real I can be based on my own personal experience, the better, right? There's no point in me being like, well, hypothetically, if this happens, it's like, no, this is happening in my life right now. And this is something that's really real for me and that I can speak to or talk about. So for the solo shows, it's really like an intuitive, just this is what I need to be talking about, or a conversation I'm having with somebody. And then they're surprised to find out later when I'm like, hey, by the way, that conversation was on the show this week. And, and they're like, oh God, I hope you didn't say my name. I'm like, no, it's all private, but it's important. And so I think that people really relate to that. And then as far as guests, it's really the guests that I think that are interesting, intelligent. They have something that they've either overcome. They are a former somebody. I love former somebodies. I'm a former college athlete. You're who are you? And the people who are willing to go deep and to be really honest, selfishly, it's people I want to get connected to. You know, I'm doing a lot of work with some really cool people coming up. You know, one lady's on my favorite TV show, and I just was like, I would love to talk to her. That would be a really interesting conversation. How did you get there? And things that pull me out of my comfort zone. And so that's sort of how I choose them.
That's awesome. Looking back, I, you've got hundreds of thousands of weekly listeners. You're in 40 different countries, syndicated in across dozens of AM, FM channels. Is there anything that you would have done differently? And if so, what might that have been?
The first thing, so I hesitate to be like, I would have done this differently, because I'm like, well, it's led me to here, and here is perfect and it's working out. However, if I could speak to my, Phoebe of 3 years ago, I think I would let her know that this is going to unravel in the way it's supposed to. And I think I put so much pressure on myself at the beginning. I mean, my first 10 episodes were like, because I didn't even know if I had anything of value to say. And that is like actually even embarrassing to admit. But the Phoebe of 3 years ago was like, I don't know if I can do this on my own. I don't know if I have things to say. And so I would have just taken a lot of pressure off of myself. And even, people say that it takes about 25. I've heard this right when I started podcasting. They're like, oh, it takes, 25 episodes to find your footing. It took me probably 65. I mean, it took me so long that when I saw the red light go on, I just lost my personality and I couldn't say anything. And it was just, I was thinking too much, and I wanted people to perceive me in a certain way. And when I had my own show, I was able to let that go a little bit. And some of my episodes were totally scripted. And that was coming from the person who said that I'm unscripted, but I was so nervous that if people saw the real me, that they wouldn't listen anymore, or they wouldn't care what I had to say. So there's an element of confidence, obviously, but that's, I think, comes with the territory, right? It comes with experience and doing this a lot. And then strategically, I would have gone for people that were what I would have considered out of my league sooner. Right? You never know. And just be really, I interviewed Mia Hamm last year, which was a big interview for me. Mia Hamm, Christine Lilly, and Tisha Venturini, who were some of my idols growing up. And I flew to Atlanta. I mean, it was a whole thing where, basically, really quick background, but they were like, okay, next Friday, this was a Wednesday, and they said, next Friday, you're on. I had been pursuing them for 6 months. I was
Wow.
on the dot. So people are like, oh God, that's amazing. You're so lucky. I'm like, well, I put a lot of time and effort and reminders. And, I was just getting really excited, but not too excited in case it didn't happen. And so she's like, we're going to be in Atlanta on that Friday. And I just wrote the manager back, and I was like, that's so funny. I'll be in Atlanta that weekend. Is there any way we can do it in person? And she was like, yeah, definitely. If you're going to be here already. And so I just hung up with her, or I stopped the email, closed my inbox, and I called my best friend who happens to live in Atlanta. And I was like, cancel everything. I'm buying a ticket. I'm going to be in Atlanta next week. And she's like, what's going on? I was like, don't worry about it. We're making this happen. So it was like this, almost like, you gotta go for it. You gotta go for those things, those people that you think are going to make a difference on the show. And it turned out, I had a girlfriend of mine who was like, well, what's the ROI on you flying there and getting a hotel and all that? And I was like, it's not about the ROI for me right now. This is a big moment in the show. I felt it. And if I had listened to other people who thought I was nuts, I never would have had that experience. So trusting myself a little bit more.
That's first of all, that's awesome. I love how you played that. Funny, I'm going to be in Atlanta that weekend as well. And so you touched on a couple things that I think are really important that I think most people struggle with when it comes to just curating and creating content in general. This idea of, I don't know if I have anything of value. And we all, I fortunately, I played music professional for a long time. So I've got a background of being on stage and I'm comfortable kind of doing stuff like this. But I've had years of experience doing it. What are some things you would tell somebody that is looking to pursue this idea of starting a podcast today, and how to tackle some of those emotional drawbacks early on?
Well, first I would say play to your strengths. So podcasting might not be right for you. If this is right, it's something, if you can grow into it. I think that I think people feel a lot of pressure right now to start a podcast because everybody else is doing it. And I think there's merit to that because it might be pushing you out of your comfort zone. And I think there's a fine line between resistance because it's something you should do, or fear and FOMO. So really make sure that you are playing to your strength here. If, speaking is the way that you feel comfortable, or that your audience receives that, then great. If your audience is listening to podcasts, great. If they're not, which I think there's a very small market that is not listening to podcasts, but, making sure that it's the right channel for you is number one. And then as far as like overcoming the emotional stuff, that I would just say get some sort of mentor. Really, I think mentorship is something that is so underrated, whether that's a coach or a mentor or whatever, but figuring out, staying really true to who you are, who you're attracting, and what you're going to say, and keep having it come back to that, right? Having a seamless message that always comes back to whatever that red thread throughout your interviews is. Mine is always unbecoming, but it's growing as I'm growing. There are moments where I have totally doubted. I even now, and I don't even mean to say it like that, but I get I just did an interview 2 weeks ago that I was so nervous about that I almost was like, if this woman quizzed me on her life, I would pass with flying colors. And there's no reason for that. I did so much research and I was like, my God. But I think that preparation helps me be present. That's the most important thing, is like, do your prep work, because it's so, even in this conversation, right? The fact that you knew that I had a scrunchie business in 5th grade, right? That does so much as far as rapport and moving forward. If you were like, hey, do you have someone who you could recommend? Of course, because I know you do your homework. So that's really important as a podcaster, to do the work. And another thing, I see people getting tripped up on numbers all the time. I'm in all kinds of Facebook groups where it's podcast specific, and they're like, oh, I got 77 downloads on my first episode. Is that good? And it's like, just cut yourself some slack. If you were going to put up a sign on the side of the road selling brownies or Snapple, in my case, it wouldn't take off right away. So cut yourself some slack. Don't compare yourself. It's way easier said than done. But if I wouldn't have compared, and I still do it, I'm like, oh God, I don't have 50 million downloads per episode. What am I doing with my life? It's like, just chill out. And, I can like laugh
I've only
about
got
that,
49.999. Damn it.
Right? But it's real, it's really real. And I think that people spend a lot of time on the marketing of the show, which is important. But I think the content of the show, the richness of the conversation, being prepared, being really present. So you're not, even video show, I would have probably, this is going back to the other question, I would have started video sooner. I found it was hard for me to focus on the light being, like the video, the microphone, what am I saying? I'm listening. There are a lot of components to it that make a really good show. And I think it was important for me to grow into that. So for somebody starting out, right, is it the right medium? Do you have the right coaching or people to look up to, or community of people who are supporting you? And don't compare yourself. Really stay true to, is this a message that you're going to want to live into for the next 3 to 5 years? That should be a commitment.
Speaking of support, commitment, what are some good resources that really inspired you? Obviously The Alchemist, and the name of the show, but other books, podcasts, videos, movies, maybe even. What were some things that really made a difference for you?
So the number one book that I recommend most often is Untethered Soul. I love that book. I think a lot of, and people say it all the time, but personal entrepreneurship is the greatest personal development lesson you'll ever start to learn. And it doesn't just put you on the track of personal development. It like launches you into it. It like throws you in the deep end. And so really staying on top of your emotional state is the most important thing, because you can fall into comparison. You can fall into expectations and outcomes versus like being here in the moment. So I love Untethered Soul. Anything by Michael Singer, I love. I'm always reading 1,000 books at one time. So I'm trying to think of what I'm reading. Awareness by Anthony DeMello. That's a book I read recently that I love him. I'm interviewing somebody from their organization soon, which I'm really excited about.
Nice.
Movies, I'm not a huge movie person, but what I do think that's important is to find inspiration in other areas. So I am a reality TV show person. I love it. Married at First Sight, Bachelor. I mean, all of those all of those shows that people might classify as guilty pleasures. I don't think you should ever feel guilty about pleasure, but finding other areas, right? Pull yourself out of your comfort zone, do fun things, get out in nature, and find other ways to be inspired than listening to shows that are in the same genre. Like I find it really hard because I compare myself to podcasters like Jordan Harbinger, who's a friend of mine, and also his show is amazing. But if I listen to his show all the time, then I'm going to become more like him, which takes away from why people would listen to me. So finding inspiration in music, like I feel very inspired by violin instrumental music, which is very strange, but also and I feel inspired by Kesha and Lady Gaga and Beyonce, so it's having a wide range. I think just constantly staying inspired in conversation, and being present. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but
yeah, no, it does. I thank you for that. I think there's both external forms of inspiration and then internal forms of inspiration. I think you covered the gambit. So really appreciate that. I also am I'm a massive classical fan, but even just tones, I've got a lot of just different tones that, based off of science, right? This tone helps you study or concentrate or heal. And Spotify has a lot of those different kind of tonalities.
Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense for you, right? Because you're a music person.
Sure.
And I think that like that, go to where you're led, right? That makes a lot of sense. I am quite a music person, but I'm not a musical person. I was more, I have no idea how to play any instruments or anything like that, but I feel inspired by that,
Sure.
Listening to people that are in their element. That is what inspires me.
So we're coming up on time. I got a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Connection. I'm able to connect with people and relate to people. And I think that is something that I'm learning is not as common as I think it is, because it comes really naturally to me. So, really and I think in the connection is like really seeing people is something that I think that would be my superpower.
So is it more of a Professor Xavier from X-Men kind of seeing people and being able to, right? Like, cause maybe it's kind of what you kind of explained is something that I believe he's known for is connection and telekinesis and being able to get in the minds of others. Or is it more on the being able to connect just deeply with somebody and understand them almost instantaneously?
I think it's both, to be honest. I think there's an element of that, something that's come in really strong for me in the last year specifically has really been leaning into like my intuition. And so I feel like I know people and kind of how they're feeling before we talk, or I can tune in to their energy. So that's the whole rabbit hole I can go down, but for sake of time, the other part is, I understand a lot of the human emotion. I don't take myself very seriously. So I can also understand, that we're going to relate at a root core level of feelings and emotions. So I know that I can talk about my dad passing away or getting hit by a car. You might not have that experience, but I can also talk about heartbreak and loneliness in a way that will relate to you, that people can attach to because they know, oh, I have felt that way. The details, never been hit by a car, but I have felt, what it's like to feel really scared and alone. And I think I bring a humanity to a conversation that people might be afraid to go there. And that just helps with connection. It helps with a richness of depth that I think, because I know myself really well. And so allowing me to be open opens other people as well.
I like that. How do people get a hold of Phoebe if they've got questions and they want to reach out and connect and get to know you or listen to you? What are some good ways to connect with you?
The two best ways are Instagram. So if you have questions, I love to be very available. I think it's important,
Mhm.
not just from a business standpoint, but from a human to human standpoint. Again, what we were just talking about, like I love sharing. I mean, I pour my heart out through my podcast and through my writing, and I do that on Instagram. So at Phoebe Mroczek, which is a hard name to say, let alone spell. There are a lot of consonants, but hopefully around this video somewhere you can spell it. And then just join me on the podcast. I love attracting people who are those beacons in their own communities, the people who are the sharers, who share great resources. I consider myself to be one of those people, to celebrate and to support people that you care about, that you feel connected to. We need more of those people. And so
Right.
if, if anything that in our conversation connects to somebody, come see me, chat to me on Instagram. I take people through my day quite personally. So that's
And
more of a personal thing. And
what's the Instagram handle?
at Phoebe Mroczek.
Actually, can you spell Mroczek for
I can,
everybody?
yes. So first name is Phoebe, and then last name Mroczek.
I would be hard pressed to bet that anybody would have gotten that correct had they looked up Phoebe Mroczek on their own without
Well,
you
I
having
always tell people, I'm like, Phoebe, Phoebe, and then just write Mro, and you cannot, I'm always the first one that comes
That's
up there.
awesome. Yeah,
A lot of consonants.
I'm usually the only John Zoz. Um,
Exactly.
although there was a point in time in my career where I was ranking with somebody that another John Cesaro in Southern Illinois that is a chiropractor. Um, there's I went on I ended up adding all the John Cesaros on like Facebook and I wanted to create like a John Cesaro community.
I'm in like a Phoebe Facebook group, and then there's like a couple Mroczeks. I'm like, what is going on? That I
Are
thought it
we
was original.
related?
We have to be. I mean, we have to be.
Right? Does anybody have a podcast? Because that would be really weird. All right, I'm the only
Right.
one with a podcast. Okay, good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Insperity for allowing these wonderful conversations to materialize. Again, Phoebe Mroczek, the founder host of Unbecoming podcast. You could tune in and listen to it on any streaming platform available out there. Also, go to unbecomingpodcast.com. And this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Phoebe.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for doing this. It's really cool to see the other spotlights and to watch the other people in the community. So thank you.
My pleasure.